There's a book by Kurt Vonnegut called Cat's Cradle. It was written back in 1963. It's a satirical look at the world in his day. It's got science fiction and it's full of satire and black humor. He satirizes issues of science, technology, religion, the arms race, and all kinds of stuff back then. The main character in it is seeking to write a book about the day the world ended, which was the bombing of Hiroshima. And no, I haven't read it, don't know that much about it. But what I find interesting is that in the course of the book, another book, as this individual is trying to write this book, he finds a book that's entitled, "What Can a Thoughtful Man Hope for Mankind on Earth, Given the Experience of the Past Million Years?" And of course, the one who finds it, this chief character, he's really anxious to read it. And he finds that it's not going to take him very long, very long, because there's one word, and that word is nothing. So in his book on satire, Kurt Vonnegut says that we can expect, or we can hope for, nothing based upon past experience of the earth. That's kind of sad, because I think that we need hope. There really are kind of two types of hope, and we'll get to that in a second. But what is hope, and how does the Bible define it? How do we define it? Well, the word I want us to look at. I'm really going up and down here. Romans chapter 8, verses 18 through 25 is kind of the text I want to focus on. And Paul talks there about hope. In fact, he says in verse 24, "For in hope we have been saved, delivered." And I want to talk a little bit about hope today. And the word that Paul uses is defined as looking forward with some reason of confidence. And what's interesting is that even though Paul in verse 19 isn't talking about hope within us, it is talking about the hope of creation. And he calls it the anxious longing. The King James says earnest expectation. And so I think that suggests that hope ought to have some degree of confidence behind it. And the English word is defined as to wish for something, to desire something, or to have confidence in something. And when you stop and consider these definitions, both in the original language as well as English, it gives the idea of something that we don't currently have. It's something we want in the future. And that's why Paul says later on, hope that is seen is not hope. But this, of course, leads us in the fact that there are two types of hope, really. There's one, the subjective, which is based on my desires, my wishes. It's something that, I want. For instance, when I was a kid, I hoped that my parents would take me to the movies. Didn't have any expectation, but there would. Maybe they would. But that was my desire, to go to the movies. Supposedly there's a story about a man sentenced to death, and this is in ancient times, and he wanted to obtain a reprieve from the king, and he said that he could teach the king's horse to fly within 1 year, and if on the condition that if he didn't succeed, he'd be put to death at the end of the year. Well, within a year, the man explained later, the king may die, I may die, the horse may die. Furthermore, in a year, who knows, maybe the horses will learn to fly. So you see, his hope was based upon his desire to get out of jail. And he thought, well, I'm going to die anyway, so I might as well at least extend my life. But, sometimes, actually, hope should be based on evidence. That is something that gives us reasonable confidence. Now, looking at it from the opposite idea, There was two friends who were talking with each other. One remarked to his friend and said, man, you look so depressed. What could you be thinking about that depresses you? And the man said, my future. Your future, he said. What in the world would what in the world would make it so hopeless? And his miserable friend sighed and unhappily said, my past. So you see, he had confidence that he shouldn't hope. But hope actually is something that we can have, something that should give us confidence. Well, let's explore a little bit about why we need hope. Our world certainly doesn't give us hope. That was kind of the point of the Cat's Cradle beginning, that this fellow found a book that asked the question, what can a thoughtful man hope for mankind on the earth, given the experience of the past million years, and it's nothing. Well, certainly our world doesn't really give us much hope. Kind of the major focus today is evolution in our scientific world and the atheistic world. And so if you're a scientific atheistic evolutionist, you really have nothing to hope for beyond this life. Now, I'm sure that they can come to the reasonable conclusion, well, this is all that I've got, so I might as well keep my hope short term to what my life is all about. But there isn't any reason to hope beyond this life if evolution is true. It limits it to only our view of life currently, and that's why a lot of hope is wishfulness, is because we don't have any confidence in true, real hope. Nothing in the world in the past gives us true hope. And actually, even though there are stories of inspiration about people starting off with nothing and making it big, and people starting with despair and finding a rich, full life, at least, we have some evidence of the short-term hope. But hope is nothing more than our own accomplishments, but then it's over. And after that, what happens? Well, really not much. And that's why Paul talks to us about biblical hope. What is biblical hope? Well, biblical hope looks at, we see that sin rules this world. Satan, that old serpent, got Adam and Eve to listen to him, and we've inherited that very same response from them. And we see when we look back at Scripture that creation was changed. In fact, God told Adam, "Cursed is the ground because of you," and that really created, the whole idea about creation changing. And Paul, in fact, says creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it. I'm having a hard time today. My apologies. But what that's reminding us is that God created this perfect world, and sin, in our accepting of it, changed it. And so creation is subjected to futility. It doesn't function the way it should. Now, yeah, it still has, a measure of stability and so forth to it, but it's still not functioning the way God created it to. And we humans are part of creation. And Genesis 2:7, it says that God took and formed Adam from the dust of the earth. And of course, when you look at, our actual physical makeup, all the elements that are in us as humans, they're the elements you find here on the earth and in creation. But God breathed into Adam life. Matter became animated in us. And of course, God put his image in us. But today, we can see that just as creation was cursed, and so we are, our bodies decay into death, passing away. And we groan just like creation does. In fact, I think that that's part and parcel of what humanity is all about in a way. Paul starts off in Romans 8:18 and says, "For I consider the sufferings of the present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. Now, I know he uses the word sufferings there, but when he's writing to these Roman Christians, they don't appear to be suffering persecution. So I'm wondering if Paul has in mind there just the difficulties that we humans experience here in the earth, the futility of creation, the futility and the cursing that God placed upon it. And so that suggests then that when we look at the earth, there's nothing in it that tells us we should have hope. I wonder too, as Paul talks about creation groaning and waiting in hope, if he has in mind us thinking back to Israel. In Exodus chapter 2, verses 23 through 25, as Moses goes off to the land of Midian, where he's going to spend 40 years learning to be a shepherd instead of living in splendor in Pharaoh's house. It says that Israel sighed, Israel groaned, and Israel cried out. And God then heard what was going on, heard their groaning. He remembered the covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he took notice of what was going on. And then it was after that in chapter 3 that God called Moses to deliver Israel. So it's kind of like, God sees our situation, he hears our cries, and then he responds and gives us hope. And so we humans cry out. And again, it's because of what we experience, whether as Christians we experience persecution, or whether as humans we just experience the difficulties of this life. Paul says that those difficulties tell us and remind us of the cursing that God put on this earth when sin entered in. And we should not look to then our present sufferings and the way that the world works as though that's all there is. And it kind of reminds me of there's a deacon I knew way long time ago, and he was talking about we're telling a story about talking with a friend one time who was not a believer, and the friend said something about death being natural, and all of a sudden it struck the deacon, a guy that I really came to appreciate for the depth of his thinking. He said to his friend, he said, wait a second, death isn't natural. God didn't create this world with death in it. Death is unnatural. And so what we need to see then is I think that Paul is trying to set us up to say that there's nothing out there that gives us hope. That instead we need to look elsewhere. But God hears our need, and he sends Jesus to take our place. Jesus is raised from the dead, which is, death is the curse placed upon us as humans. And he is raised from the dead to show that there is indeed hope for humanity to regain the glory that we had when God originally created us. In fact, Paul mentions in verse 19, for the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. So there Paul suggests that God has this point in the future in which he will again make us what we were originally. And so God has a plan to do that. But the biblical hope that Paul gives us, I think, is found in two images. Down in verse 23, Paul says, and not only this, but we also ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves. And so see there, God hears our groaning, and he takes notice and remembers the covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob for us in order to find the fulfillment in Jesus and bring about the blessings and the reversal of the curse. But anyway, we waiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. Now I know that that those two are tied together, but I kind of want to think of them quite separately. First, redemption is the buying us back from slavery and from bondage. And I think that reminds us then of what God did in Egypt. And we should go back and read and understand that great biblical redemption story, because that reminds us that just as the Israelites were in bondage and couldn't break free, God did through his great power. And God does the same thing in breaking us free from our spiritual bondage. Only he doesn't do it with this show of brute force like he did with the Egyptians. He does it with a different kind of power, and raises Jesus back from the dead. But the redemption of our bodies, though, brings us into adoption as sons. That is, we're adopted into God's family. But you'll notice that Paul says as sons. Now, Paul's not trying to be patriarchy or patriarchal, as many accuse him. That's just back in Paul's day. It's generally the sons who receive the inheritance. And in fact, in the Roman and Greek cultures, oftentimes when a man did not have a male heir, he would adopt a son to be his heir. But that meant that adopted son would then inherit all that the man left behind. And it would be the responsibility of that heir in order to continue using it and so forth. But you see, when you're adopted as a son, that means there's an inheritance. That means God is giving you something to look forward to. And God has an inheritance for us. When I think about inheritance, I always think about the rich in our country. And I was doing a little bit of research upon some of the rich. There's several who created this pledge called the Giving Pledge, where they pledge to give away most of their wealth. And in fact, one of them is Warren Buffett. He's called the Oracle of Omaha. I guess that's because, he lives in Omaha, Nebraska, a place where you don't really think of some place like that as housing a billionaire. But anyway, he said he was going to give away 99% of his wealth. And several others, Bill Gates signed the pledge, Elon Musk, Ted Turner, and all of them, are talking about the fact that they're not going to leave their vast fortune to their kids. Now, Buffett's worth about 101.4 billion. I've read where Elon Musk is worth about 170 billion. That's mind-boggling to me. But what's interesting, though, is that here's Buffett's famous quote about not leaving his fortune to his children. I want to give my kids just enough so that they would feel they could do anything, but not so much that they would feel like doing nothing. And I wonder if to some degree that's a little bit why God has this hope for us in the future. He's giving us hope so that now we can serve him and do anything for him. But that hope is in the future. It's not seen. It's not there just yet. It's waiting for us. And so we can't sit around and do nothing while waiting for it. But Paul goes on to say, though, that for in hope we have been saved. Hope is our salvation. And I think part of that is because it gives us something to look forward to, and that gives us reason to live now. That gives us reason to do what we can now. And I think that's what Warren Buffett was trying to say about his kids, that he's giving them enough now that they could go out and kind of do what they need to do. But if he gave it all to them, then they could just sit back and do nothing. And I think to some degree that's what God is trying to prevent in us. He's not trying to give us the idea that we can sit back and do nothing. But so hope gives us that focal point in the future. And Paul even goes on to say that if we hope for what we do not see with perseverance, we wait eagerly for it. So hope helps us to persevere. Hope says what we will gain is immensely more valuable than what we currently have. In fact, back up in verse 18, Paul says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present age are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us." So Paul says that, you could look and say, well, okay, I've got it pretty good here, so I'm not going to worry about the future. And Paul says, well, wait a second, there's something up there that's immensely more valuable than what you've got now. And so you ought to then focus on that. There was a movie several years ago. It's called Brewster's Millions. And I forgot to look up who the character was. I just wrote down because I know the basic plot. But anyway, in it, this his main character, he doesn't have much. He's in fact he's a black man, and he's playing semi-pro ball with a bunch of buddies. And it turns out he's got a relative, this crusty old white guy, who makes a little video for him and tells him, he said, listen, you're my only relative, and he explains how they're related, and then says, but here's what I want to do. He said, I'm giving you, I think it was $30 million. He said, and you have to spend it in, maybe it was just $1 million. I forgot. No, I think it was 30 million. But anyway, he says, you've got to spend it in 30 days. And I mean, you just can't give it away. You have to actually spend it and get something for it. And so, and then in 30 days, if you've done that, and there were lawyers there that would go over the receipts and so forth, then you're going to get 300 million. So, and what's interesting is, you would think that at the beginning, hey, that'd be easy, just go out, But what happened was he couldn't tell anybody about it. And so all of these friends that he had playing baseball and so forth, they couldn't understand why he's just spending this money like crazy. And they're trying to talk him out of it. And then they're trying to get it. And of course, there's somebody in the background who's trying to prevent him from getting the 300 million. But what's interesting, though, is that the movie really plays up the fact that this is difficult. This is not easy, spending this money in order to get the bigger inheritance. And you see, that's what God wants us to realize, is that we have a life here, and we need to live it, and yes, we need to do everything we can with it, but we've got something coming up in the future. And so when we live in hope today, we need to make sure that we don't let things going on distract us. Right now, I think a lot of us are hoping that this virus goes away and we can return to normal. That's of course not our ultimate hope, but when we look at it, it doesn't seem like it's going away. I mean, first of all, okay, we're gonna do this, and that'll kind of slow it down, and no, that didn't work. And then we're going to do this, and that's going to slow it down. No, that didn't work. And it's just going to keep on going. And so there's nothing going on right now that suggests we ought to have hope that this thing is going away anytime soon. But too often we let small hopes and short gains distract us from the bigger picture. Now, I'm not saying that we should give up on those short-term hopes. We shouldn't ask God for help, and we shouldn't try to deal with that. But what we need to be praying for, though, is to keep our focus upon reaching that goal of obtaining that hope in the final end. Sometimes we get so caught up in dealing with difficulties that we lose that big picture, and we don't keep our focus upon that final inheritance that's coming. This world will never get us what we really long for, and that's true freedom from the difficulties and all of that we experience on this earth. Only Jesus can do that. And so we should pray for God to relieve our current situation, but never forget the really big picture that one day hope will be revealed by the only one who can promise us an inheritance unlike anything this world has to offer. And you see, the hope that we have is hope with confidence, because the scriptures show us the God who is mighty and powerful and gracious and compassionate, and somebody who can offer us with that hope, and then we can then trust in what he says. And as we long for that hope, then it helps us to persevere this very day. There's a lady called Florence Chadwick. She was a swimmer, and back in August 8, 1950, at age 32, she crossed the English Channel from France to England in 13 hours and 23 minutes. And that broke a record by an American swimmer, Gertrude Ederle. A year later, she swam it the other way. It took her 16 hours. Maybe, I'm sure that because of currents and so forth, it was a little bit more difficult, and making her the first woman to swim the English Channel in both directions. And ultimately, she swam the channel 4 times. So she's quite an experienced swimmer and really knows what she's doing. Well, she decided to swim the stretch between Catalina Island off of the coast of California, and it had never been done by a woman before. Now she was age 34, and she was determined to do this. The chosen date was the 4th of July, 1952, which is, of course, a holiday, and apparently much of the country was watching it on TV. You know what's interesting about this, for those who may not know much about California coastline and the water out there, actually the coastline of California going down through LA and so forth is really influenced by cold water currents, and it really doesn't get all that warm during the summertime. So, but anyway, during the swim, rifles were blasted over the waves to fend off sharks. And after nearly 16 hours in the water, she complained of numbness, which you can well understand. She squinted to see the shore, but the fog, and for those of you who don't know, there's a lot of marine fog that rolls in off of the ocean. It reduced her visibility to almost zero, and she called out to her mother and her trainer in the rescue boat that she couldn't go on. They encouraged her to continue, but when she looked where she thought the shoreline was, she could see nothing. So she gave up and was pulled from the water. Can you imagine how she felt when she discovered that she was only half a mile from the shore? She knew then she physically could have done it, but later she reported that if only I had seen the land, I could have made it. She was right, of course. And a few weeks later, she attempted the same swim and under the same foggy conditions and finished the swim in record time. So for her, what she couldn't see distracted her and discouraged her. We can't see, but you see, we have confidence because we have God behind us who has promised us that there is inheritance waiting. So even though you can't see it, and even though there's nothing in this world that gives you confidence that it's going to be there, God has said it's there. And that's why we are saved in hope. God bless.